Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you guys are well equipped with your drink and snacks, and I hope you can absorb as much as you can with our guests for the current session. And we have actually Manny coding developer relations engineer from Polygon, and just a little bit of information about who he is. Right, so Manny is a developer relations engineer at Polygon who has a mission to empower and educate new and existing Web3 developers. Manny is a Web2 and Web3 developer with 14 years of experience in tech, working with startups to S&P 500 companies as a tech lead and a full stack web developer. With that, I would like everyone, if you can, type in the chat box, just type 1 to welcome Manny on stage. And Manny, hello, Manny.
Hello. Can you guys hear me all right? Can you hear me just fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Awesome. Loud and clear. Awesome. So
All
thank
right.
you. Thank you for that. Good to go in terms of I can share the presentation and start going into it. Or did you guys have any initial questions for me?
No, one small little thing is that because we did quite a simple formal introduction about who you are. So maybe if you want to add on a little bit of who you are, would be great. Otherwise, you are good to go, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. So just a little bit about me, guys. I did the presentation earlier today, but I've been in tech for a decent amount of time. I'm a developer relations engineer, more specifically for the Europe region. I'm responsible for talks, technical talks. I'm responsible for trying to help out with organizing the conferences. I do tech talks like this. I do written tutorials. I also look out for my YouTube channel, which will be coming out soon, where I come up with Web 2 and Web 3 content to be able to help people build out full stack applications or full stack dApps for that matter. So I have a Solidity background. I have, I'm highly effective in terms of building out web apps in terms of APIs. And I've also been part of the industry for such a long time in terms of leading teams and even trying to build different products with different clients and companies. So that's a little bit about myself. And one fun fact is that I speak probably 3.5 languages or so, and that's a small thing about me. But if that works, I will jump into the presentation. This will be exciting because there's actually a new piece of code that I introduced for this presentation. I have done versions of this, but there is something relatively new with this that I will be going, and hopefully the demo gods are going to be okay with me today and going to grant me the graces of being able to basically do this presentation, this live coding, and making sure that it goes all right. As you can imagine, dealing with the blockchain sometimes can be finicky, so let's see if we can get through this. All right, so let's dive in. Today we're going to be talking about Polygon ID, and Polygon ID is one of those products or services that Polygon offers as a means to be able to really get into the identity space, which is a really, I think it's really exciting, and it's a really neat idea, utilizing and leveraging some existing technology that kind of exists out there, but packaging in a way so that it makes it easier for everyday users and as well as just developers to be able to take advantage of it. And I think it's really cool. So before getting into it, I definitely recommend, if you haven't already, follow me on Twitter. I tweet a lot in terms of different articles. I tweet a lot about different opinions on things. If you can grab your QR code, scan this, you'll be able to see, you'll be able to follow me on Twitter. So I've already kind of given a little bit of an intro about myself. I've done different conferences, and we're going to be doing different global conferences as well. So you can kind of catch me around the world doing different talks and also maybe even seeing for different meetups. So just a small recap, though, that this presentation actually is a recap of another developer relations engineer by the name of Steph Orpia. She's actually based in the US. She did this original talk in Bogota for East DEF CON, whatnot. And this is essentially my remix of that presentation, but she does an awesome job of being able to do this presentation. So for me, a lot of the stuff I learned from her as well. And this is just me rehashing it to be able to kind of say, hey, this is what I think what I think in terms of my flavor to it. But in that sense, if you haven't had a chance, definitely check her out and check her talk out on for for DevCon, not for Bogota. I will mention, like, if you do want to follow along for the presentation, you can actually scan this QR code, and don't worry, we'll be giving this at near the end of the presentation so that you can have all the links and resources to this so that you can kind of follow along as well. All right, so don't worry, we're going to get back to that. So let's start off. What kind of information did I just give you? I just gave you 5 pieces of information about myself. I showed you what my photo looks like, what my job, where I work, what my handle is, what my name is, right? This is all information I've revealed to you, but in that sense, how can you trust any of the information that I gave you? And I want you to keep that in mind, because I just presented you with some information, but how do we actually verify or validate that information going forward when it comes to making claims about certain things, about my job, about who I am, etc. So it's just good to know. Keep that in mind. Like, these are different information that we give out to people, saying that we claim that we have certain things or whatnot, but we ultimately sometimes have to do some sort of verification for that as well. So let's come up with a scenario, just so that the best scenario is using SpongeBob, and just to illustrate this point, right? So let's say SpongeBob is driving around, he gets pulled over by some police officers, and they ask him, "Can you please identify yourself? What's your name?" In that sense, SpongeBob obviously just points to his name tag. Well, my name is SpongeBob, right? Like, obviously it's on my name tag. But in the spirit of Web3, we have this idea of don't trust, verify. So how do we know what he's saying is true? Like, and not inventing stories. Like, how do we verify that information? Well, one of the main ways that we actually verify that information is what we use today is actually, a driver's license, for that matter. So, he'll give out a driver's license that has his name, etc., to be able to say, like, here's the proof. Here is exactly who I say I am. It comes from a reputable institution in that sense, right? But SpongeBob essentially gave the proof of what he was asked in terms of the question, which is like who he was, but gave a whole bunch of other information about himself that he didn't want to divulge or whatnot. He gave, where this verification of the document was issued, what his address is, what his physical trait, what his birth date is, what his physical dimensions, his gender, all this information that has nothing to do with his name, because the only request that was asked of him was just his name, right? And this is a problem that we deal with today in terms of big technology companies. There's just a lot of information that they gather on us, and they use it in ways of being able to kind of, gather as much. And I understand there's ways for them to monetize that in terms of ads, etc. But it's just a lot of information that they gather on us, when really, for most of the time, for signups, they just need your name and last name to be able to do some sort of verification. And for, like, some compliance, they need to make sure that you're over 13 years of age, but they don't necessarily need to keep that information or store that information in that sense. They just need to verify it in a way to verify that. So in the current landscape of identity offerings, there's actually 3 that we're going to look at, right? So some of them that you're actually going to be familiar with. One is centralized identity, the other one is federated identity, and the other one is SSI, which we'll get into in the last bit, right? And so jumping into centralized identity, you might have seen this before. You have different sites that ask you for your username and password, your name, etc. They're really like single purpose. They're siloed. You might have multiple logins, and it really introduces the idea of like, hey, you need to be able to pay for a password manager now, because you have just so many siloed and segregated information and whatnot. But one of the downfalls of this too is you get like a fragmented identity of what exists in this space and whatnot. So let's say you're on website A, your name is, John Doe, and then you sign up to website B and your name is John Doe. And let's say you get married, whatnot, and your name changes, for that matter, your last name. You're going to have to go through every one of these sites to be able to update that information. And it just represents a fragmented portion of who you are. Right. And honestly, nobody's going to go through and update like 50 websites with that information. So you're just going to leave it up to, okay, whatever, I'm just going to leave it. So it really does create this idea of like, hey, what is a consistent identity online? Right. And this is some characteristics of centralized identity. Federated identity takes it a step further, where it's like, hey, this is one multi-purpose. So it's one identity that can be applied to multiple environments, right? And if you really want to read up more about centralized identity and federated identity, I definitely recommend going to okta.com. So okta.com, and looking up federated identity and centralized identity. They go into a bigger in depth in terms of what that definition looks like. But some characteristics of federated identity is, it's reusable. So an example like this, and this is not the exact prime example of like federated identity, but it gets pretty close, is SSO, so single sign-on, where we give all our information to Google, or for that matter Microsoft. We have our identity set with them, and then we try to sign into different websites, knowing that we're just sharing that information from that one source of truth or whatnot. So it's a little bit more portable. But one of the downfalls is that really, who owns that information? It's that big tech company. So it's Google that owns it, or it's Apple that owns it in terms of maybe not Apple, but like Microsoft that owns it in terms of that information. And really, it's less in your hands and it's more on their hands, right? So what would be an alternative to this? We have like our centralized identity, federated identity. Like, is there a third option? And there is. SSI, or self-sovereign identity, is another solution. More specifically, decentralized self-sovereign identity. So like federated identity, it's multi-purpose, portable. So in other words, you're able to carry that one idea in terms of your identity to multiple places. You actually control your data, so you actually have more control over, where it's stored, what information is shared, and it eliminates the need of third parties like, Google Auth for that matter, or sign in with Facebook. It handles that with privacy, using zero knowledge proofs to be able to have more granular control over your identity. Now, I do recommend, if you have a chance, it's a little bit of a thick book, but I definitely recommend checking this out. All these concepts come from this book as well, called Self-Sovereign Identity. And it's really about empowering you as a user to be able to have more control of and more ownership over your information, right? Whether or not that's an individual or an organization, you really have more granular control over it, and you can decide who to divulge certain information, and even if you need to divulge certain information, right? So I definitely recommend taking a look at this book. So in the book, it talks about, in self-sovereign identity, it talks about this concept of the trust triangle, right? So I'm going to apply this to this SpongeBob again. So we get the holder in terms of SpongeBob. We have the police officer, who's the verifier, who asks SpongeBob, hey, I need you to verify who you say you are, right? And there needs to be some sort of form of verification or some sort of proof. And that way, the one way that we identified was through verified credentials as a driver's license that comes from a reputable source in terms of an issuer. In this case, it's like a boating school, right? And Miss Puff is really the one that actually issues out these driver's license, which is given to SpongeBob, and SpongeBob is able to give it to the verifier, and the verifier looks at the document and says, okay, this is a reputable source from the issuer. I trust this, so this is exactly who you say you are. It's great, right? So this is where Polygon ID kind of comes in, because we're trying to introduce this idea where we have, this same concept of being able to validate or verify some certain information about yourself, but doing it in a way that's more privacy focused. Now, and using zero knowledge proof to be able to handle that privacy. Now, I won't go into details, but some of the benefits are, like, hey, you have a single universal identity, you have more management over the rights in terms of who has access to certain information, and this is where Polygon ID really, really shines. And there's a lot of different benefits of it, right? It's decentralized, it's trustless and permissionless in that sense. It's really, really great. So, and I'm going to dive into what that actually looks like. So let's get back to SpongeBob in terms of what that looks like. That whole scenario of, okay, we have the holder, the verifier, the issuer, and the verified credentials, and they show that verified credentials to the verifier and say this is the actual proof. So let's look at a real life example of what this looked like in terms of applicable to today's presentation. Okay, so I have myself, the identity holder. I need to be able to prove that I am over a certain age. I get a claim, in this case, from an issuer. So from this site, I get the issuer that actually validates who I say I am, issues me a claim. The verifier is a piece of code that says, hey, I'm looking for I'm looking for an age verification. I'm looking for this particular attribute. I just need to know, do you meet this criteria without actually divulging what your actual age is, right? And I might even specify in that verification, I only trust certain issuers. So, and I'm going to prompt you if you do want to access certain information or interact with my service, I'm going to ask you to be able to create a cryptographic proof to prove that you meet the requirements of I'm older than 18 or older than 20 for that matter in terms of it. And the neat thing about this, what's going on is that when the verifier makes that prompt to me, the holder, using Polygon ID, and I create that cryptographic proof, I do not share any information about myself. The only information I'm sharing is, hey, did I meet that actual criteria that came also from the issuer? Yes or no, right? And it gives this idea of like, hey, I'm able to validate really obscure information about myself and really hold that information to myself so that I don't have to actually share it and I have more control over it. Okay. So in practice, we're going to go over what this looks like. So hopefully the demo gods are going to be good to me. But if you're here so far, please give me a +1 that you're following along and you do you're understanding how you're excited about understanding how this kind of looks like in practice. So if you're here in the chat, please give me a +1. Let me know that we're still awake. So +1, thank you guys. So one of the things that we're going to actually be doing is we're going to take advantage of the Polygon ID app. And this is something that you can download on the App Store. So on the Google Play Store, as well as the Apple iOS App Store. So I'm going to need this, and I have it already installed on my phone, and I'm going to go through the verification process. Okay. So the first thing I need to do is actually go to an issuer. In this case, we have a beta called platform-tests.polygon ID. And I'm going to walk through the step of actually creating a proof, and hopefully everything goes according to plan. So here, let's go through. I'm here logged into platform-test.polygon ID. The first thing I need to do as an issuer, this is like, imagine that I'm able to issue out credentials or claims about certain individuals. I'm going to create a new schema. Okay, this is just hey, I need to define the template of what these claims should look like. Okay, I'm going to call this KYC, and it's important that I actually remember how this is spelled. So bear with me here. I just need to look at the code that I have. Should be called KYC age credentials. Okay. The schema hidden name will be the same. That's fine. And what I'm going to do is the display name, I'm going to call it date. The hidden name, again, set to date. And I'm going to set this to date for them to be able to define what that date looks like. Now, it's important to know that right now there's only 3 different types of values that are offered. We are looking at the idea of introducing strings, but the idea is there's true, false, date, and number. And the idea behind this, if you think about it for zero knowledge proofs, is you want to give a range of information so it can be actually obscure. Because if I asked you, just tell me what your name is, and I know we gave that example earlier, it's really a yes or no. It's like, are you David? Yes or no? Then okay, there's no obscurity in that sense. There's no way to be able to say, like, there's no way to prove, okay, well, maybe that's not David in that sense. Now, when we give the example of an age range, I'm not divulging some information. There has to be an idea of a range to be able to say, hey, there's a level of unknown in it. So in this case, we're going to be giving a date attribute so that they can actually define and be able to claim, add a date, add a specific age to their claim. Now, one thing, you can add up to 2 attributes to this as a max. So these are different types of attributes that you can issue out in a claim. So in this case, maybe like an age and maybe let's say like a height for that matter, some information that you can actually create as a schema. Now, I do recommend that you do create a mandatory claim expiration so that whenever a claim is issued, there's an actual, hey, you have to specify that there's an expiration date. So let's save and issue the claim. So here we have the KYC age credential, and I'm going to specify a date. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm born in 1990, January 1st for that matter. And I'm going to say the expiration is going to be of, 2 weeks from now. So I'm going to go next steps, and I'm going to introduce a claim link. So this is actually quite new, where you can specify like, hey, that only one time this claim can be issued, so that once it's given out to the individual who does claim it, okay, nobody else can actually add this to their phone. So I'm just going to say I can only create one, and I'm going to create a claim link. So once I've done this, I've created essentially the claim for this specific date. So January 1st, 1990. I'm going to go to the claim link. Okay. And what I'm going to do, and I'm going to switch over to 1 second here to essentially my phone, and I'll share my screen for my phone of what this process kind of looks like. So, and let's just minimize this a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is load up the Polygon ID app. And the first thing I'm going to do is see here is actually a list of all the claims that I have. I have a different type of KYC age credential here. It's expired. We could actually see the information of what it is and when the expiration date is. So I'm just going to remove this from my wallet. Okay. And what I'm going to do here, because I'm presented with this QR code, is that I'm going to connect to the site. So kind of see here, it's going to prompt me, do I want to connect my wallet? I'm going to enter my super secret password. It's going to authenticate. So what this is doing is saying, similar to Wallet Connect, is that we're actually, establishing a connection with the site. So I'll give it a second here. Oh boy. All right, let's try this again. I'm just going to close the app. Super secret password. Let's try connecting again. Connect my wallet. Nice. And I think that one of the reasons maybe the authentication is not going through is I didn't update my phone to the latest application. So there has been a few things that have changed with this. So I will walk you through in terms of the code, because it looks like the authentication process is not going to go through for this. But as far as it goes, I'll walk you through the idea. What's happening is that I will connect to the site. I will actually download a claim like we saw previously that's actually on my phone. What ends up happening is from there, I create a cryptographic proof from the code. So I'm going to show what the code is that we're going to be dealing with. So give me 1 second here. So this will actually be updated in the repo. I should be updating this here on, you can go to github.coding with Manny, or actually, sorry, OX Polygon ID, tutorial examples, and you should say this on the on-chain verification example, okay? And I'll explain exactly what this is doing, but we'll go over it as well as to what the code is. So stay tuned. You should be able to see this code going up because there's a lot of new code that's being set up. But the idea behind this, and let's just switch over to the code, is I have a repo here, and I'm going to be performing an on-chain verification. And what that looks like is what's happening is I'm creating a way for when you scan a QR code, you need to verify your age. And if you have the age verification within your Polygon ID wallet, then it will allow you to mint some ERC20 tokens, which will then be deposited to your MetaMask wallet. But the only way to mint is by essentially being able to have that proof of age that's stored in your wallet. Right? So what that looks like, and I'm going to just switch over to package.json to show you exactly what the front end looks like. So this is what this looks like. This will be actually a prompt, and I'll share you with my phone what that looks like again. It won't go through the authentication process because we don't have the claim, but at least we're able to kind of see what this looks like when we're scanning this with our phone. So here again, I'm on my phone, super secret password. I'm going to scan this, and it's going to ask for a proof of request. In this case, your KYC, know your client age credentials. If you're older than 21, I'm going to continue. In this case, I don't actually have the cryptographic proof. I don't have the claim stored in my wallet, so it's going to deny it. But this would be the process of saying, hey, you need to verify this specific your specific age, and you need to have this claim stored on your Polygon ID wallet. So for this contract that we're deploying, we actually have that front end which we displayed, but we also have a contract. And the contract that we're actually which we deployed was an ERC20 token, ERC20 contract. And what this is a standard Open Zeppelin ERC20 contract, but with some additional functionality into it. You can see that there's a ZKP verifier in it. And what it does is it extends it so that once you submit a ZKP response, so in other words, when you submit your response after you've been prompted, it's like, hey, now you need to prove your age, it actually hits this request alongside the actual minting function. And what's going to do is, like, if everything looks good, it's going to call this other function called after proof submit. And after proof submit is a hook that you can actually take advantage of, where we're saying after it is successfully verified, it's going to go through the proof submit. And here we're going to mint a function of a certain amount of tokens to that specific user. And the only way to mint is actually to go through that age verification. Okay. And you can, once you do deploy this, you actually have to, once it is deployed, you actually have to specify the schema for this. And you can see all the environment variables for this in terms of what I need to do in terms of the function that needs to be that we're calling after the mint has happened, and what this is a hash of the function, a hash of a function name. We're specifying the network in terms of what's being called, the allowed issuers. So you can actually whitelist specific issuers in terms of saying, I only trust these specific issuers to be able to prove that identity. I'm going to require an attribute of date, and we define that in our platform.test, where the attribute name was actually date. And we're going to say, hey, we're going to verify that the date is less than 2002 January 1st, using the less than attribute in that sense. And you can actually follow along with all the ZK query language to be able to understand these operators. And the schema ID, the schema hash, and the schema URL are all on the Polygon platform tests. You can kind of see that here. Going to our schemas, when we click here, we're able to see that we have our schema ID, our schema hash, and schema URL, and these are needed so that you can actually submit the how to interpret for the contract on how to handle the ZKP, so the zero knowledge proof. So what happens is, what you're doing here is you're deploying your contract, right? Very simple hard hat in terms of deploying the contract. And then what you're going to do is you're actually going to set the request, the ZKP request for that contract. And what that means is, all it's going to do is saying, hey, you have your contract deployed. I'm going to establish a template as to how the verification process should work, right? And so, and in this case, we set up that the verification template is an age verification, which then prompts to be able to say, hey, did you meet this criteria? I'm looking for this specific type of attribute, form the claim. If it exists and you are approved, then you'll go through the process of being able to mint with the after proof submit function. So all this is doing is saying, match the query in terms of the functionality in terms of the operators. Hey, is it less than 2002 January 1st? All this has to be set up in the same way that you actually set up your front end as well as your contract when you're submitting it for that template. Once that goes through, it actually goes through the process and mints your token, and you should be able to see that on your MetaMask in terms of your wallet stored on your phone. So unfortunately today the demo didn't necessarily go through correctly, but that's fine. I do have other tutorials, and I definitely recommend to follow this along in terms of the README file. It'll actually go through the entire process, and I have another repo for this for Polygon ID on-chain verification, which goes through the process of, hey, how do you deploy it? How do you go through the process of going through your platform ID? How do you create a schema? And even going through the process of, hey, did you actually get specific errors, and how do you handle those specific errors? So I'll be posting a link in the resources as well to be able to go through this. But what I think is really cool is that for Polygon ID, you can do on-chain verification and you can do off-chain verification. So if I need to prove my age on a contract to be able to mint it, I'm able to do that. If I want to prove my age on a website, I'm able to do that with a zero knowledge proof through a QR code process. If I have that claim, it'll create the cryptographic proof. I prove that I've met the criteria, and then I would gain access, or I would gain a mint. So it's applicable to both the blockchain as well as off-chain in terms of Web2 apps or whatnot that you might want to have some sort of authentication in that form. So there's a lot to go through in terms of this, and this new code will actually be deployed hopefully this by the end of today, or if not this weekend, so that you can take advantage of and really kind of dive in deeper. I definitely recommend going through and reading the README, which will go through the process of walking you through the entire steps of being able to verify your contract. Make sure that you, like myself, have the latest Polygon ID app installed on your phone. This does introduce breaking changes, so it's really important that you do have that. But I definitely think it's just really cool, because what this really introduces is now more control over your identity, in terms of what self-sovereign identity looks like. And it really introduces the idea that we have more control over who we say we are on the internet, as opposed to giving it to big tech companies like Google that own all that data, and we essentially are able to kind of hold most of that information. So here are the list of resources. There's a couple of GitHub tutorials. There's a front-end code sandbox. There's a Notion document, the issuer, and the Polygon ID docs. There's also actually a university.polygon.technology site that we didn't go through, but it goes over Polygon ID, even goes over zero knowledge proofs. If you have a chance, check this out. It's a really good resource to be able to kind of understand this from a high level concept overview of, hey, how does the trust triangle work? How does Polygon ID fit within this model of the trust triangle? And how would you go about the process of doing on-chain verification as well? So that is Polygon ID. If you did enjoy this, and again, I apologize that the demo didn't go exactly as planned, but hopefully you will be able to dive into the code a little later to be able to see how this works for yourself. And I definitely recommend going through the README. So that is it.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone in the hall, you have any questions for Manny? Please just type in the chat. Oh, we have actually. We have this question from Kryptonite. On App Store, my Polygon ID app didn't update since months with error displayed. It isn't compatible with this device, iOS 16.2. Is there any solution, please?
Apart from downgrading, probably not at this moment, but it is something that I probably will talk to the team about, and making sure that everything is working correctly. The unfortunate part is that a lot of people are off today on Saturday. So as far as it goes, I will have to check with them. They do updates rather quickly. So once it actually goes through, it goes through rather quickly on the App Store. So just keep up to date. I know there's some certain updates with iOS and Mac, and even Ventura. I'm having issues as well. So I definitely recommend just keeping an eye out. Right now, unfortunately, there is. Oh, and I was going to mention that if you do want like further some support or to have different questions, I definitely recommend checking out the Polygon Discord server. There is a Polygon ID section there, and we're actually going to be doing a little bit more support over the coming months. So we'll actually have office hours. So if you do have questions, even past this conference or whatnot, and you want to be able to, hey, like Manny, I had a question about this. Like, how do you do certain implementations? We will be holding office hours in a couple of weeks to be able to say, hey guys, come and ask your questions.
Cool. Thanks, Manny. All right, guys, don't be shy to unmute yourself, and also to turn on your camera to ask Manny any questions, okay, in regards to Polygon ID or any other related to Web3 questions you have that Manny can answer. If not, I mean, while waiting, Israel, do you have any questions for Manny?
Yeah, Marco, thanks a lot. Manny, first of all, I like to thank you for sharing your knowledge with our community. I can't wait to see the impact you will have on our participants and their projects. And well, I have a question here. Can I use Polygon ID with Ethereum or SK EVM? CK EVM?
Yeah, so currently Polygon ID only works on Mumbai testnet right now because it's in beta. So as far as it goes, it's not set up ZK EVM. So this is another network that Polygon offers, zero knowledge Ethereum virtual machine in terms of its own network. It's a mouthful. It doesn't actually have the mathematical capabilities to do so. On Ethereum, you can do it, but the way that it actually works is because this is a decentralized identity, it actually makes a request to the blockchain to be able to verify if the claim is still active. So every time you actually create a claim, it actually makes a marker on a specific contract in terms of a type of Merkle tree to be able to say, hey, this identifier for this claim is still valid, and you can actually invalidate it. And but you also need a validator, and the validator contract is only on Polygon Mumbai as it stands right now in terms of beta. It's not. It could technically be later on in terms of being on Ethereum. It has all the capability to do so, but as of right now, it's only currently supported on Mumbai.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question here. Can it work with any two-factor authentication hardware device? It really can depend on what the standards or how the practices of that 2FA is set up. But if you, let's say, have a verification process where, hey, you logged in, and then the second process said, hey, you introduced your own multi-factor authentication where you're saying, hey, you need to do an extra proof who you say you are, like you just added your password, but now I'm going to be presenting you a QR code to be able to present who you are. Then you could essentially become, go through that two-factor authentication program. If you're talking about authenticator apps like Google Authenticator or, Duo for that matter, or some other existing multi-factor authentication apps, those are their own standards, and they don't involve making transactions or requests to the blockchain. And with Polygon ID, and again, you have to understand that the tech behind Polygon ID is not new. These are all zero knowledge proofs. All these technologies out there, all this is doing is packaging it up to make it a lot easier so people can actually use it. So it would be different because there is a blockchain request or a blockchain element to it compared to other two-factor authentications, which is completely off-chain.
Cool.
So any support for Active Directory for enterprise, that I don't know. I do know that the whole goal of Polygon ID is to really make it more open so other people can adopt this. So we're not, in this case, an issuer can be anybody. It really is up to you in terms of managing that. Think of it as more of like a standard that people are that Polygon is kind of introducing. So if you do want to be able to build an application that might support App Directory for enterprise, that's a way that you can actually go with it. But as far as it goes, it's not something that's going to be like, hey, we own the tech in that sense. It's more, hey, we've produced this way and this method to do things. It follows a lot of standards in terms of also the Web3 standard for decentralized identity. I definitely recommend looking at that too. That's actually really, really long and to look at. But as far as it goes, you could, if it supports DID, then that may be a way for supporting also Active Directory.
Thank you, Manny.
My pleasure.
We got one more. Please, could you spoiler the next milestone with a strong partner in 2023?
Yeah. Well, if you guys saw the market lately, like Polygon is up. I won't say what's going on. Unfortunately, I can't say, but there is definitely a lot of people that we're talking to and some really interesting companies, some really interesting S&P 500 companies that we're also talking to. So I wish I could divulge that information, but as far as it goes, my lips are sealed. But there's some really cool things down the pipeline.
Okay. Manny, basically, can anyone become an issuer when it comes to Polygon ID?
Yeah, so the idea behind it is you'll see platform-test is like a beta to be able to show you what an issuer could look like, right? Anybody technically could become an issuer, right? And that's the idea of making it open and more adopted, right? So if you were a government institution, or let's say you're a member of a specific club, like anybody could essentially become an issuer. And there's even code for that to be able to build your own issuer in that sense. The thing to remember is that from a verification point of view, the verifier will just be able to say, hey, do I trust these different types of issuers, to be able to say, hey, do I trust the government of Chile for that matter, or do I trust, the government of America for some sort of verification, right? It's up to the verifier to be able to say, I whitelist these specific issuers, right? So it's more open-ended. So we don't have a definitive list and saying these are approved issuers. It's more open so that people can actually define their own standards.
And are you able to like revoke a claim?
Yes. So this is really, really interesting. So one of the questions that we often get is like, okay, well, what happens if you have your phone and you're storing your claim into your phone in terms of your wallet? Let's say you lose your phone. Like, what happens then, right? Well, similarly to like if you had a passport and you lose your passport, what do? You essentially, hey, you file that you lost your passport, you go back to the government institution, be able to kind of go through this process of, hey, I lost my passport, right? Where Polygon ID comes in, there is even a way where you can actually do KYC that we can actually verify, and you can actually upload your passport to get some claims that are downloaded to prove who you say you are. What we were able to do with the idea of if you do lose like your phone, you can deauthorize or essentially revoke a claim, because every time the verification process goes through, it makes one last check to the blockchain to be able to say, hey, is this claim still valid? Now, it doesn't store any information about the claim. It just says that this claim ID, is it valid or not? So the issuer can say, hey, I can revoke the claim so that it's whenever you go through the verification process, it becomes invalid. So think of it as like an immediate way for you to call up your credit card company and say, hey, I need you to put pause on my credit cards because they just got stolen. So this would be a way to be able to do that, to add a level of security on top of, you have the security of your phone, you have the security of the app having a password. So the different levels of security there that exist to be able to really, really help you also revoke those claims, to be able to kind of say, hey, maybe I'm in a spot where I don't want that claim shared with other people.
Got it. Right.
Manny,
There's one question. Yeah, sorry, Israel, go ahead.
Sorry. Talking about that, Manny, how does what happened with FTX affect in terms of regulation and standards? How Polygon are facing it?
So I guess this is getting at like, how does FTX affect Polygon?
Yes.
Well, as far as it goes, I don't think it affects us that much. If anything, like, you have kind of seen where, and I don't want to go solely by the idea, and I can't fully speak into this behalf. I'm not probably the right person, but this is only purely my opinion in that sense, right? If you saw what the market is in terms of, if you go to CoinMarketCap, you can kind of see that, Polygon has been quite stable throughout this whole process, right? Every other, blockchain in terms of cryptocurrencies have kind of taken a dive. And if anything, like, Polygon is up. Actually, the market is up right now a little bit, which is nice. But as far as it goes, it's been quite constant going through this entire process, right? What this does for FTX, I definitely recommend. I definitely think that there's going to be more scrutiny when it comes to blockchain technology, and I think that as a company, we're taking it very seriously, or at least I've seen we're taking it very seriously to be able to say, like, hey, like, we're not trying to hide information. Everything's becoming open source, and there's some really interesting changes that are going to be coming. I can't reveal the alpha, but there's some interesting changes that are coming, which like really, really kind of gets it out of the idea of like, there's a single key holder that, like Sam Bankman-Fried, who basically was playing with other people's money. So as far as it goes, I don't necessarily see that there was much that affected Polygon.
Okay, thanks, Manny.
So here, one of them is, does any identity best practice in Web3 for reference? That's one question, and we have one more. The other one, I'll ask it in a bit.
So, does any identity best practice, or is there like an identity best practice for Web3 as a reference? Yeah, there's actually a few. So the main two, one is like, there's two ways that you can actually do identity in Web3. One of them is using sign-in with Ethereum, and I definitely recommend, if you haven't seen this, I actually have another talk on this called like digital signatures and sign-in with Ethereum, if you look this up. And what this is, hey, you can use your MetaMask wallet. It prompts you for a signature, and it actually divulges your, it's able to say, hey, sign this message. And I'm able to reverse engineer to be able to say, hey, did this come from your actual wallet? To be able to say this signature came from you, to establish a session, to be able to do almost like you're authenticating with the username and password, right? The only issue with that is like, okay, that's great. You have an authentication aspect to it, but you still have some sort of identifier to be able to say, hey, it's this wallet that authenticated. So that's a common practice. If you don't have any name associated with your wallet or etc., or have no information associated with the wallet, that's a way to be able to, you can keep have a little bit more privacy in that sense. Where zero knowledge proofs come in with Polygon ID and even checking out IDEN3. So IDEN3 and Polygon ID, and technically Polygon ID is built on top of IDEN3. And all it is again being able to prove something about yourself without actually divulging that information. And this is a really interesting concept with zero knowledge proofs, to be able to go and do blockchain transactions, be doing off-chain transactions, and again, not divulging that much information about yourself. So there's two practices, like this new one that's kind of coming in, which is also known as like the W3C DID. So the W3 spec for decentralized identity, and Polygon ID and IDEN3 really kind of adhere to this as well. So as far as it goes, these are some of the two major practices. And again, the second one for W3 DID is still like being implemented, but signing with Ethereum is also another way for you to do best practice for Web3 authentication. And
okay, yep. So the next question is: does Polygon plan to use this technology with metaverse like Sandbox or Decentraland?
I think what you have to understand with this platform is that anybody can use it. So as far as it goes, if they want to adopt it, even if a government institution wants to adopt it, anybody can do that. And I've seen some interesting applications where people have done like trying to do account abstraction. So like, let's say you didn't necessarily own the wallet and the wallet's actually stored online. You can actually have zero knowledge proof approved transactions. And that way you have like one proximity away where you're not actually directly approving transactions, so that it gives you a level of anonymity as well. So that's something also to kind of look into.
Cool. Thanks, Manny, for answering questions from the crowd. I got two questions for Manny. Or Israel, do you have any questions for Manny before I go ahead with my question?
Yeah, you just said that the Polygon ID was in beta. So what will be out of beta?
Yeah, so hopefully soon, coming into this year, there's a lot of new changes. I think one of the major hurdles is that there's a few different teams that are working on zero knowledge proofs, and the team that's working on Polygon ID also happens to be the team that's working on these ZKVM network, which is quite big, and we're planning to go into it's in testnet right now, and we're planning to go to a public net this year. So it's just like, how do we manage the resources to be able to say, should we focus on this new network or should we focus on this identification solution? I think that it will come off in beta this year for sure, or at least I think it will be. So it might be Q1, Q2 in terms of this year. As to, again, these are ideas, but I don't know for sure in that sense.
Okay. Welcome.
So just out of curiosity, how would government wants to adopt this kind of technology?
So let's say it's actually quite simple. Well, I say simple, but if you know how governments are, they take a lot of time to be able to adopt technology. The nice thing is that it's the way that we go about it is we establish standards or utilizing standards. So it's something that, hey, everybody agrees upon, this is just the way to do things. The same way that we have OAuth 2 and OpenID, these are just standards that we kind of adopt, right? So as far as it goes for them, a way that that governments can kind of already potentially adopt this is, identification when it comes to IDs, right? If there's an interesting way for you as a government institution to be able to say, hey, let me issue your driver's license, and you're able to hold that on your phone, and that is able to, prove who you say you are on that specific phone, then, and if you lose it, you can revoke it in that sense really quickly. And again, it's not divulging any information. If it gets lost, even the claim can become expired after a certain period of time. It makes it a lot easier for them to not have to deal with the paperwork. Also, the idea of fraud in terms of people taking different IDs and being able to, come up with malicious ways to be able to, harm people. And this is people don't realize this, but like identity fraud or identity like theft is actually a really serious problem. And people, if you actually have identity theft happen to you, you might be dealing with the issue for 2 years to be able to prove, who, like, that you're the person that took out all these loans or etc. It's a big problem. And this would be a solution to kind of help with that, as well as like, hey, you just need a QR code. You have somebody install an app on their phone, and then they have their driver's license that is approved, and the government can still revoke that driver's license too.
Thanks. We have 2 questions from the audience. Do you see there any conflicts in to be pseudonym with your wallet and being exposed with a connected identity like on Instagram?
Do you see any conflicts in the pseudonyms with your wallet and being exposed with a connected identity on my? Are you asking me because you're planning to hack my Instagram account? As far as it goes, like if I understand the question is, like, do I see any potential risks of like, having pseudonyms and in your identity? I think that what we've learned, at least even the past 10 years, is like, Facebook has had so many leaks. There's so many companies that had so many identity leaks happen nowadays. Thanks, crypto. But there's been so much information that's leaked, and I'm sure everybody here has been a victim of it. Even if something simple as like, hey, somebody leaked your phone number, and you're using that to be able to do your verification. Let's say you even leaked your date of birth. For a lot of different services, you phone up and you're like, hey, I want to take out a loan or etc. They ask you like, please prove your date of birth. Those simple things have like really screwed people over in that sense, right? And I think that this is a way to kind of combat that. And I almost think of it as like, people look at like, oh, okay, like 10 million different accounts have been stolen or exposed online or whatnot. This problem also exists in real life, where if you've ever gone to a hotel in, like say overseas, and they ask you for your passport, a lot of times they'll actually take a photocopy of your passport, right? Now, I dare you to ask them where that information is stored, right? And if they actually remove or destroy that document, you have to make the request for them to destroy that document after you leave. If they don't, right, that is a stack of papers that's just at a hotel room. And there's actually been cases where people have broken into these hotels, and it's not like it's a vault like a hotel in that sense. They break in and they steal a ton of these papers, and they have these passports that have been photocopied, and they're able to do identity theft in that sense as well. And that has really harmed, and it costs people like thousands and thousands, if not like hundreds of millions of dollars as a problem going forward. So as far as it goes, like, I think that this is an issue when it comes to just Web 2 solutions. And we have to figure out what is a different solution going forward. Like, how can we do this smarter? How can we protect our identity further? How do we can have more granularity in terms of what we divulge, and be able to say like, hey, I am the person that controls my information, versus giving it to Google. And I know I'm pointing at Google, and I know I use Gmail a lot, but at the same time, like, I shouldn't be that company. I shouldn't delegate my identity to somebody else.
Thank you, Manny, for answering the question. We got one last question from Joseph. Can Polygon ID be used with other blockchains, like Cosmos, Polkadot, Bitcoin, etc.?
So Polygon ID, the way that it's set up, again, there's still a contract that's deployed on the Polygon Mumbai testnet, right? And there probably will be a contract that's deployed to Polygon mainnet. Now, it's a Solidity contract, and it's the same almost EVM chain, slightly different or whatnot, but the idea, the principles in terms of the functionality for Polygon and Ethereum are slightly, the basis of what they can do in terms of their functionality can happen. So you could hypothetically apply that contract to Ethereum to be able to take advantage of Polygon ID. For other chains, we would have to look at, hey, we have to deploy that contract so that it actually connects to it. But for some chains that are not EVM compatible, we would have to come up with a completely different solution for that, right? So Polygon is an example of that. And as far as Bitcoin, there have been talks about like, hey, there's different types of solutions that you can create a blockchain, like a smart contract blockchain solution. But as it stands right now, there's not really like a definitive solution that I've seen as a developer where I'm able to develop smart contracts on Bitcoin or deploy a smart contract on the Bitcoin network. So in short, not really. And in the long term, it really depends on different EVM chains. Hypothetically, we could, apply this to other EVM chains. As long as we have the contract deployed, which would make it cross-chain compatible for verification, which is kind of nice. And again, what you have to remember is that once you do that, you can have the same contract in different EVM chains. And all you need to do is you're creating a claim and none of the information about yourself is stored online. It's just the claim. And it's the issuer who really knows that information. And in this sense, an issuer might be a government institution. And it's only between them and the verifier in terms of saying, hey, I just trust this issuer. So in short, no, but it could be applied to EVM chains.
All right. Thank you, Manny. Thank you so much for your time. Really, a lot of information that have been shared to everyone in the room, including myself. So we really want to thank you once again for being here and contributing your time to our community down here. And also, yeah, for that, is there anything you want to share? Just the last part, anything you want to pass on to everyone before we pass on to the next session?
Yeah. So the last thing I will say is definitely scan this presentation. It'll go over all the code, etc. You'll have all the resource links as well. Definitely follow me on Twitter. You will be able to see updates, and feel free to @ me. I do answer questions. Look out for the Discord on Polygon ID. Just on Polygon. We'll be doing office hours fairly soon. And the last thing is, I will say, follow me on YouTube soon, because there will be a really good tutorials that I'll be putting out in the next week or so, really about all different types of authentications and building apps, and even how to interact with blockchain as well. So that's it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Manny. And we shall catch you soon on YouTube. All right, guys, that's all for this session with Manny. Thank you. You can always put +1 to give a big clap and cheer to Manny of his wonderful time with us now. And we were going to take about a 2-3 minutes break, and then we're going to have Wendy back on stage. Okay, so stay tuned.
Thanks, guys.